a lot of questions on the organic versus non-GMO topic, but one which is a fairly simple one, and you sort of alluded to it, but I think the numbers speak for themselves. But do you think gluten-free is a fad?
I still, I would say the honest answer is I scratch my head every year wondering when is this finally going to slow down, and it never seems to. And I think there are elements of the gluten-free growth which are faddish. And as I did mention, I, as a consumer, can read an article in Men's Health magazine talking about, hey, go gluten-free and sleep better, have more energy, lose weight, et cetera, and logically, if I cut back on gluten, what am I cutting back on? I'm cutting back on probably a lot of white flour, maybe things like breads and bagels and cookies and crackers and things that probably aren't so good for me to eat a lot of anyway. So it might not just be equally substituting products that are, gluten-free. Also, one of the things I'll just mention as an extension of this is the so-called paleo diet, which again features protein, but is avoiding highly processed foods, which may also be those that have gluten. So I do think that there are elements that are faddish, so they're not based on a medical need or a gluten intolerance. So it probably means consumers coming in and out of it, but yet the numbers speak for themselves. It just seems to chug along. It seems to grow. Now, I don't think it's going to grow indefinitely. It's going to hit a ceiling, but when that is, I honestly don't know. I know that there's a growth expected for the next, I'd say, at least 3 years, based on the research I've seen and companies who have done deep studies on this. So I do think it has legs, and it's going to continue to grow.
Well, and to your point before, I mean, if they're actually making products that taste better and are gluten-free, then it's not inconceivable that people will buy more of it.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is when people are choking down stuff that doesn't really taste good for the sake of their health, they rarely stick with it for any amount of time.
So just two questions sort of similar on Whole Foods, and not really on Whole Foods, but with their announcement of 2018 getting everything non-GMO certified, there are obviously going to be some products that will have trouble being certified. I'm thinking about cheese, right? Some cheese who age for a year or 2 years might not make it.
Dairy is a whole area that's still gray in terms of, all that.
So, I mean, obviously they probably could get to a large part of their, I mean, it seems like a big, and you referenced a bottleneck of getting products certified. So what's the odds that this 2018 date moves out and that it's not really that 2018? I think it's...
Yeah, well, I would say that would fall into the category of anything's possible. And I know from talking directly with key senior people at Whole Foods, they fully acknowledge that there were a lot of unknown questions when they got into this. And even when they made the announcement 18 months ago, they acknowledge that there's lots of areas that are to be defined, and not the least of which dairy and livestock, in terms of how far back do you go in terms of what the animals are eating and all that. And so it's been an area of uncertainty. So if I was just to make up a number, I would probably say 70-30, that meaning 30% possibility of it being pushed back another year or two. But right now, the party line with Whole Foods is that they're sticking with 2018, and they're stressing, it doesn't mean that anyone's going to be summarily dropped or discontinued, but it just needs to be labeled. And it might be that all the cheeses in the specialty cheese department are labeled as, may contain GMOs or something. I'm not sure how they're going to word it or how they're going to frame it, but that's a possibility.
Right. So if you have a stamp, and I don't mean literally a stamp, but organic, gluten-free, and non-GMO, you're seeing significant volume growth today. And I think you alluded to it in your comments about milk and buying, organic milk, you'd go broke. There's probably a lot of other consumers that are out there that feel the same way. So the growth in non-GMO is a cheaper alternative than organic. So I know, companies like Hain are embracing non-GMO because it's going to help their volume growth. But longer term, the growth in that, with that label and that stamp out there of non-GMO versus organic, and it's a cheaper price. How do you see that developing, or what are the gives and take along that?
Well, I mean, I think just there's a sort of a limited amount of organic out there right now. Now, organic continues to grow pretty strongly. I think it passed $36 billion in the U.S. At retail, which is, still very strong. And again, if you put this against growth with conventional products, a lot of conventional products, if you just look at them across the board like you look at organic, are growing at the rate of inflation, which is very negligible, or the rate of population growth, but they're not showing this kind of solid, steady growth. And the people in the channel are going out of their way to stress that being verified non-GMO is the starting point, that they really want to see people move along the continuum to more sustainable agriculture and methods of production and things like that. And so organic is still the gold standard. They'd like to see people moving towards along, there's things like biodynamic, which is a little wacky. There's, these heirloom varieties of produce and livestock. There's other things out there that aren't necessarily, monoculture, factory farming. And so I do think that organic is going to continue growing. In terms of sheer numbers, I guess verified non-GMO has the potential to eclipse it at some point if a lot of people jump into it, just based on, the percentage of organic as part of the overall food supply. I think it's in the range of it's still below 5% in the U.S. And so verified non-GMO could be bigger, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
So along those same lines, if you got one of those three labels, you're growing, and you put it in different channels, and not obviously, but a lot of brands are experiencing significant volume growth. When do you cross over to having to invest in a brand, as I think you talked about before, just sort of having that consumer acceptance and consumer, relate to the brand? And you have a lot of companies out there, and I'm thinking about Hain in particular, who are acquiring brands, increasing distribution, but it don't really seem to be investing in the brand and establishing that relationship with the consumer. How do we know when we're to that point or not, where they're surpassing the volume growth?
Well, I think an obvious and maybe logical way to put a value on a brand is the spread between their average price and the category average price. So if they're able to sustain a premium, that's always a good sign. When you look at scanning data and you look at the percent sold on deal, so they might show, a Hain brand like Dream brand, they're non-dairy beverages, and I'm just making this up. I haven't made a study of it, but if 30% of their volume is sold on deal and that can diminish over time, that's a good indicator that people are choosing to buy it on a more regular basis at full price, and they're less dependent on promotional spending. But I do think that brands, whether they're as large as Hain or they're larger, post 100 million in sales like Stonyfield and Organic Valley and Amy's Kitchen and Kashi and others, I think they all need to be investing to build that relationship with the consumer, because ultimately it's the only countervailing force they have against the power of the retailer and the distributor, who tends to, hold most of the power in the channel. And so whether it's around slotting fees and free fills or increased promotional spending and ad monies and all these kinds of things, the only time they can push back is when they do have that consumer clamoring for the product. And so I think it's smart when they do. I mean, they're all doing some amount of social media, PR, special event sampling, in-store demos, and less, traditional marketing vehicles like couponing and, broad-scale advertising. But they all need to be investing, I think, in growing that consumer loyalty.
In other areas in the supermarket, when private label has made inroads, it's really hurt the large branded players. Is that the same phenomenon that you would expect to see in the organic space as these big private label brands grow? Or
yeah, I mean, I think, look, private label has been around, obviously, for a long time. There's been that influence over the last, 15, maybe 20 years of premium private label. So long gone are the days of, the generic, barely edible quality. And so whether it's Marks and Spencer in the UK or President's Choice, Loblaws, things like that, where private label is now, the premium brand or a premium brand that can go head-to-head with the national brand in terms of taste and quality, I think it really does force brands to think about differentiation, and they really can't be complacent. So, in some ways being certified organic helps, and right now a lot of the organic private label tends to be in more commodity categories. So things like fluid milk, frozen fruits and vegetables. You're seeing it in yogurt to some degree. But again, it just forces brands to work on innovation, to keep their distance from being viewed as commodity, and private label being a good alternative.
Well, I know there are a few other questions. I might shoot them to you and see if we can't get them answered. I know we're running up at an hour, and I really appreciate this, Bob. This has been very helpful. I don't want to lose too many people, and I think we should just end it there. So thank you so very much, Bob, and I hope maybe in the future we can do this again.